Some of these protesters hold up signs proclaiming gays for Gaza. They might as well hold up signs saying chickens for KFC.
Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad John never wants to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
John, I have got some stuff for you this morning, dude. I've got some stuff for you.
I can't wait, Brad. Are there mornings where you don't have stuff for me? Because I feel like you deliver every morning. You do your UPod gimmick, the under-promise, over-deliver. I feel like that's you every day, Brad.
Listen to you. Flattery will get you nowhere. Okay, you say this from time to time, that you have your people, and you sort of intimate that these are like high-ranking people.
I don't. I've never intimated that, but go ahead. I do have folks that I chat with, yeah.
Okay, that make comments about the show, but you're not going to tell me who they are, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I never would, unless they say it's okay.
Okay, I have female fans of the show who have a particular opinion or two about you. And
nice. Now, remind me, I'm supposed to care, right?
One of them sent me a really funny text after the show yesterday, which
that's good.
If you're okay, I'll read it on the air. It's pretty funny.
Oh, yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
And this will be in the category. There's a lot of examples during the show, Brad, particularly for young men who listen to this show, where we learn how to handle criticism. And we learn how to handle relevant criticism and then irrelevant cat lady criticism. So I look forward to hearing both kinds, Brad.
Okay. And I'm going to say right off the top, you and I had the discussion 2 or 3 weeks back about calling 911, and you've told me that I thought it was somewhat amazing. You have never dialed 911 in your life. Wasn't that what you said?
Yeah, correct. I don't think I've ever called 911 before.
Okay. Yesterday I did again, and once again I have to tell you the semi-heartwarming story about me calling 911, okay?
Sounds great.
And also, I have in front of me here, now you being a former corporate guy from Monsanto, and you weren't necessarily, there was a retail component to Monsanto, with being, buy it for your house and the little spray bottle and stuff like that. But the majority of the focus of Monsanto, I would imagine, would have been toward the agricultural and industrial and institutional use of Roundup. Am I correct in saying that?
Correct, yep.
Okay. Sometimes there are marketing ideas that come down the pike. I scratch my head. I hold in my hand an empty can of Pepsi Nitro. Now, what's interesting about this, have you ever seen this before, this Pepsi Nitro stuff?
No, I haven't seen it. Was it like extra caffeine?
No way. Well, here, we'll do this. Let's start off the second segment with my curiosity of who came up with this idea, which is sort of interesting because on the bottom of the can, there's a line which I'm thinking to myself, I don't think I would have done that. And once again, we're talking Pepsi, which is like, what is that like? That's like a Fortune 50 company, isn't it? Isn't it like?
Oh yeah, it's huge. Yeah, because they own Tropicana and they own Chester Cheeto and all those other brands.
Right. So easily one of the and an international brand like Coca-Cola, probably not as big as Coca-Cola. Matter of fact, somebody told me. Did you know this? Somebody told me recently that they fell to number 3 in the soft drink segment. Did you know this?
Who's they? Coke or Pepsi?
No. The Pepsi fell to number 3. That it's Coke.
I don't know. After Dr. Pepper and
yes.
Keurig owns Keurig and Dr. Pepper together now.
Right. I think that was the deal. They said that it's Coke and Keurig, and which is like you say the K cups and obviously the Dr. Pepper and 7-Up is another St. Louis brand that's gone. Another St. Louis headquarters in Clayton, which is gone. Here we go again. All these former Fortune 500 companies that were headquartered in St. Louis who are either moved somewhere else or or been bought up by something. Anyway, I'll talk about the Pepsi Nitro thing because once again, I'm thinking to myself, somebody in a boardroom missed something very seriously. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people are going maybe people will look at what I'm going to say and go, oh my God, Brad, you're 180 degrees out of phase on this one because of the fact that makes that Pepsi even more interesting. But anyway, we start off the show with John Combest. He's an interesting guy. He has this website called johncombest.com, JOHNCOMBEST, johncombest.com. And what do we do? How do we get John Combest moving? We do this.
Wake up, sunshine, start your day. News and stories on the way. Feel the rhythm, hear the beat. John Combest brings it neat. 3 top stories, here they come. All the scoops, not just some. In the morning, feel the sway. John Combest, brighten your day. Top 3 stories, that's the name. Tune in daily, feel the fame. John Combest, he'll light the flame. Every morning, play the game.
John, what do you think?
Brad, I knew you had a hectic week last week, and I didn't know exactly why. And now I know you've been in the studio with Michael Posner and John Mayer composing that track. It's phenomenal, Brad. I love it.
Your own intro. Okay. Okay. Here is said John Combest, and we bring in this guy.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And John starts off with...
In third place...
Speaking of popsters and catchy lyrics, it's like that JoJo song. You know it's just too little too late. Well, Brad, the federal government is catching up to a brand new breaking development. This is important to you, Brad, because it's from our old neck of the woods. Longtime listeners know Brad and I are both from the beautiful enclave known as Affordable Spanish Lake. And Brad, the federal government is now posting signs warning about radioactive waste, and they're putting them up around Coldwater Creek. How's that for timeliness, Brad?
You know, John, I saw this when they talked about this. I think this originally came out that they were going to propose to do this a month or so back. I remember reading the story.
Yeah.
And they're actually out doing it now and talking about further killing the real estate values of North County, right? I mean, talk about...
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, unless you think that it's kind of, you want to live in kind of a risky place. Because here's the thing, Brad, if Spanish Lake wasn't risky enough, now you can go down the street and you can see these signs. I should point out, too, I don't mean to interrupt, Brad, but I should point out, too, that this story is brought to us by Allison Kite, who is like the environmental advocate, the environmental advocacy content creator at the Missouri Independent. And she's been all over this story for a long time. She does a really thorough job covering this stuff. But yes, Brad, you're right. They have talked about this for a while. But as I understand it, I don't think the signs are going up until I want to say November that the signs are going up. But now they have, you can take a look at what they look like, and they're just general warning signs. And there is a line, I think, that's interesting, at least, that says low-level radioactive materials present. But then the interesting line, Brad, is no health risk if ground is left undisturbed. And then they have a character with a circle and a line through it, like digging into the soil. So I guess, and according to this piece by Allison Kite, the original signs had a blue banner that said there may be radioactive materials near. So these signs are a little bit more aggressive, I guess you could say.
Let me think. This year is 2024. They started, according to who you talked to, they started doing this radioactive processing. Mallinckrodt did back, I believe, in 1942 or 1943. And let's just round it off to 1944. I think that's... What, 80 years? 80 years?
Yeah. I mean, in other words, most of your life, Brad.
Yeah, well, another 9, put another 9 on there, and that would be... See.
Now, the funny thing is, what I don't think we've ever explored, Brad, is that for all the great work that Just Moms STO, which is Dawn Chapman and others, have been doing on this, let me pull a Brad Hildebrand and interrupt myself. Dawn Chapman points out that there's a contingent from North County that's heading to D.C. next week, because she feels optimistic. And here's what she says. RECA advocates are returning to Washington, D.C. next week to advocate for the expansion. She said she believes Congress will act on RECA sometime in the coming months. Quote, I feel very close Chapman said. We feel like this could be it for us next week. Now, they've had their hopes dashed over and over again. But my point is, Brad, as I was interrupting myself, I think we've never talked about this, but if Don Chapman and company want to do something, just can't they haul us before Congress and be like, just look at these guys? You think these guys are normal? You think that Coldwater Creek contamination doesn't mess people up? Look at these two.
See, now here's another thing. I'm going to get myself in trouble when I say this. What we need to start a movement for North County reparations. Anybody?
Yes.
Anybody,
I mean, well, that's kind of what this is, right, Brad?
Right. But anybody who's lived in North County, they talk about the whole thing that, the black, it's in the city. Is that going anywhere again? You're on top of this kind of stuff.
Of course it is, Brad. Their deadline was September, and I'm sure they won't ask once again for more time or money. Well, but they're coming on deadline.
It's interesting. I read a little story. I was an opinion piece about a guy who talked about the reparation movement in California. And he says, okay, I'm synopsizing here. He says, let me get this straight. The people in California want reparations because of slavery, which was never in California. There were, he goes through the whole things about California was never impacted by the slave. There were no slave trades in California. I mean, the whole thing. And he goes like, okay, so, and they want reparations for this. I'm just like, I don't get it, And the bizarre part of it is that like somebody like myself, if you look at my father's side of the equation, I am only second generation American. My father was first generation American. In other words, my family didn't get to, at least on my father's side, I think on my mother's side was one generation previous to that. But nobody in my family, set foot on this continent until well after, Lincoln freed the slaves. You know what I mean? It was to the point where, we didn't do it. It wasn't us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and Lord knows the German people committed no atrocities in the last century. Brad, if I was talking to Don Chapman and I wanted to, wager on what the chances were, I might go to Las Vegas, and that kind of reminds me of story number 2.
Which is?
Up a notch to number 2.
You asked me a question last week, Brad, and I didn't have a really good answer for it. You asked me why casinos would be opposing the sports betting initiative, particularly when other casinos were supporting the sportsbook initiative. Well, I think I have a little bit of an answer for you, Brad. And this story is brought to us by CBS News. So CBS News has a big gaming segment, I guess you could call it, where, they try to get fans to go on and read sports lines and things like that. So they do pretty good reporting. Their headline is, Casino Giant Spins Big to Oppose Missouri Sports Betting Plan. Now, I'll give you a spoiler, Brad. The casino giant is Caesars Casino, which owns Harrah's. Caesars owns Harrah's. And Brad, you asked the question last week, why would casinos be opposing this? And when I say this, I should specify that it's Amendment 2 on the Missouri ballot, which would legalize sports betting. Now, as the article explains, Brad, apparently Caesars' beef with the sports betting initiative isn't because they oppose sports betting. Of course, because they do support sports betting. And in fact, they have their own sports betting app, which apparently is quite popular. Apparently, it's like in the top 5 or 6, depending on the list that you look at of top sports betting apps. But their beef with this amendment is that they feel that there are too many limitations. And it's called out by CBS News in here. Apparently, if you currently own a casino license in the state of Missouri, you get one sports betting app pass, so to speak. You get the opportunity to use one app in the state of Missouri. So as I read this story, Brad, Caesars wants the ability to have them and other casino operators be able to cash in on sports betting in multiple ways. So in other words, as I read this, if Caesars has one big sports betting app today, they want the ability to introduce, say, another sports betting app at a later time, or one of their other brands to introduce an app. Like they want to be able to have Harrah's to have their own online betting app. That's the way I read the story. Now, I'm the first one to say, Brad, we've talked about this before. I'm not an expert on sports betting apps. I don't have any of them. I'm not an expert on how they work. But in other words, thanks to the CBS piece, we see that Caesars is not at all opposed to online gambling, but they just think that this setup isn't advantageous to them, I guess you could say.
And once again, we'll point out the fact, and maybe people will go, oh, here he goes again, the fact that this is going to be a constitutional amendment. Once it's in there, it's almost impossible to change. So in other words, this is like literally, carved in stone kind of legislation, so to speak. Am I right on that? Or
Yeah, you are right on that, Brad. And so that's a great point. And the other thing, if you get a chance to skim this, listeners who get a chance to skim this, we'll see that the writers did a good job pointing out that the amendment, as you might expect, Brad, craftily written. I guess they did a better job than they did writing Amendment 3 for the marijuana initiative. But this is the Amendment 2 would give 2, quote, untethered licenses. You say, John, what does untethered mean? That means that this amendment gives 2 sports betting licenses to companies that don't have any casinos here. Now, as we know, the primary backers of Amendment 2 are both DraftKings and FanDuel. Now, for disclosure, Brad, I mentioned this before. Just to be transparent, I do own DraftKings, ticker symbol DKNG. I do own FanDuel. The parent company is Flutter, FLUT. So I am, I guess, slightly biased in this. But it's pretty funny that FanDuel, a.k.a. Flutter, and DraftKings wrote this amendment so that there were only 2 untethered licenses that would be given out. In other words, you don't have to have a casino in the state of Missouri to get those licenses.
Okay, John, one question, and I still don't understand this. Okay, maybe you can help me on this. I was listening to Sunday night, the Kansas City Chiefs were playing. God, it cracks me up to the point where, I told the story about having the Kansas City Chiefs way back when, 10, 12 years ago here in St. Louis on what is now crap, AM 1350. And people just turned up there, no, Kansas City Chiefs, who cares about the Kansas City Chiefs? Okay, anyway, that being aside, I heard an ad, I was listening to it on KMOX, and they ran an ad for the Amendment number 2, and the ad was featuring the fact that they list the St. Louis Blues, the St. Louis Cardinals, the Kansas City Chiefs, Kansas City Royals, all are in favor of Proposition 2. Why is that? Because once upon a time, especially baseball, and look at Pete Rose, if you put gambling and baseball in the same sentence, oh my God, you can't say that. Now they're like, yeah, the water's fine, let's jump on in.
Hey, that's a great question, Brad, and it's because there's no doubt that, and there's empirical studies that have shown this, that in states where you have sports betting, you have higher viewership. So when people are literally invested in the outcome of a game or in the outcome of a proposition bet, they're more likely to be watching live, which boosts the viewership numbers.
Interesting. Okay, and once again, I don't want to sound like I'm butthurt or anything like that, but once upon a time, I had a business dealing with the Cardinals. We broadcast their games for 5 years. Matter of fact, the very first year we did with 2006, which was the new stadium, which now is in terrible, horrendous shape, which is about ready to fall over. But anyway, and that was also the first year they were in the stadium and they won the World Series. But you know what? Now I see these stories in the Post-Dispatch all the time. What's wrong with the Cardinals? I said it a couple weeks ago. The team sucks and nobody wants to go downtown anymore. Simple as that.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, right?
Right, pretty simple. You don't need an expert to figure that one out. Okay, now, number 1.
The number 1.
A story that you talked about in B Block yesterday. So yesterday was September 23rd, if folks want to listen to us discuss that when we were on YouTube. Brad, you brought up yesterday at the beginning of B Block that in the accident that involved a police officer named David Lee, that the man who hit him with his car, the man who hit the police officer, you mentioned that you heard that morning that it was an illegal immigrant. Now, most news outlets hadn't reported it by then, but Brad, as it turns out, you are correct. The guy's name is Ramon Arnaldo Chavez Rodriguez, and he is a Honduran national out on bond for entering the country illegally. He's been charged with DWI death of the law enforcement officer, which is a felony, exceeding the speed limit, and operating a vehicle without a license. He apparently lived in St. Peter's, and I should point out that this story is brought to us by Ethan Colbert, or Ethan Colbert, however you want to pronounce it, from the Post-Dispatch. Brad, if folks have just a minute or two today to catch up on this story, I would suggest they go to my website. They check out Will Sharp's appearance on Annie Fry's show And Will gave a breakdown of this guy's rap sheet, essentially. And to cut to the chase, Will points out that this is just a very clear failing of prosecutors. Will's point is that this guy should have been deported after his first serious crime that he committed here. And it's a real tragedy, Brad. I think everybody that's at least local here listening to us in the St. Louis area has seen a ton of media coverage about this and about how sad it is. And you pretty much can't write a more clear story for why immigration here is broken.
Well, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and by the way, I have a police source. That's how I knew a little bit more about this yesterday before this really hit the press. Wasn't he deported once already?
Yeah, he was. And he was scheduled. There was a deportation, or at least a, quote, immigration status hearing coming up. And I would just point out, too, real quick, I know we're up against break, Brad, but this is to show you how in touch St. Louis Public Radio is. They have their own story about this, of course. But then they run a syndicated piece there's a big liberal group called Midwest Newsroom that has content creators from different local NPR affiliates. Brad, the headline on St. Louis Public Radio's website today is, Midwest states far from U.S.-Mexico border have spent millions to send troops there. And this content creator, who, by the way, is a they, I'm guessing they're either a non-binary or a trans, it's a they named Callie Cox. The point of the story, Brad, is that this is all political theater. The phrase that she cites a so-called expert using is political theater. So the point of the story that's on St. Louis Public Radio's website today is there's no need for Midwest states to get involved in immigration. It's all political theater anyway. Well, I think that's just really how would you describe that, Brad? Not reading the room if you're St. Louis Public Radio to feature this front and center, to talk about how Missouri shouldn't care about illegal immigration. We are thousands of miles away from the border, Brad.
Well, John, don't get me going on that. I mean, it's to the point where, yeah, it's wrong. Like when you say reading the room, I think that's putting it mildly. I mean, every time you lose a police officer in the line of duty, it's a very sad situation, because here's someone who's, essentially putting their life in harm's way every single day. But when they lose their life like this, it's like, okay, time out. This is really, really bad, because of the fact that once again, he wasn't, beating up a minority or anything like that. He wasn't, robbing. He wasn't, stealing from the department or anything like that. He was doing his job, helping out I believe it was a stranded motorist, and was hit by an illegal immigrant who should have been deported, who should have been in jail, and was killed. And the dude was drunk and going 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, and he shouldn't be here. And and you look at that and you go like, okay, what's wrong with this picture, right? Okay. I've said my piece. Okay, we got and let me just audible here. Third segment is going to be on the road, correct, this morning?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, let's take a break. We will be right back. This is the BJ Show, and you can check us out at bjshow.co, and also you can listen to our podcast, or we're going to call it our YouTube cast, whatever you want to call it, on bjshow.video.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?